When you look at a military staff table, you usually just you tally up the armor, you count the artillery pieces, add up the infantry battalions, and then you just point to the side with the vastly larger number.
Right, yeah. You just do the math.
Exactly. The assumption is that war is just this simple mathematical equation. Force A is exponentially larger than Force B, so, obviously Force A wins.
It's clean. It's predictable.
Right. It provides a very clean, predictable model for generals who are making plans in these warm offices, like thousands of miles away from the actual front line.
But, it completely ignores the operational environment. That's the fatal flaw.
Yeah.
You can have overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, but if you drop that massive force into, say, the trackless frozen forests of a subarctic winter.
Which is brutal.
Exactly. The mathematics just break down immediately. The environment completely neutralizes the spreadsheet.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that intersection of map-based planning and brutal ground truth is exactly what we're looking at today.
It's such a fascinating case study. It really is. We are doing a deep dive into the Winter War, specifically the battles of Suomussalmi and Raate Road.
Right, which took place in that intense window between late November 1939 and early January 1940.
Yeah, and the numbers here are just wild. We are examining how roughly 11,000 Finnish reservists systematically dismantled the Soviet Union's 45th Rifle Corps.
Which was, let's remind everyone, a heavily mechanized force of about 45,000 troops.
It's an insane disparity. And our foundational source for this is a comprehensive battlefield study by Michael Prichter.
Yeah, his work is incredible.
It really grounds the whole narrative. He actually traveled to this region in January 2018 to analyze the unchanged frozen terrain firsthand for battlefieldtravels.com.
And you kind of have to see it, or at least understand the terrain, to grasp how this happened.
Exactly. So to understand how 11,000 lightly armed men stop an armored corps, we really have to start with the strategic context. Like, why was the Soviet Union invading Finland at all in the winter of 1939? Well, the geopolitical situation in Europe was just highly volatile at that point. Germany had already invaded Poland in September.
Right, the whole board is in motion.
Exactly. And Joseph Stalin was looking at the Soviet borders, specifically the proximity of the Finnish border to the city of Leningrad.
Which was a massive deal for them.
Oh, hugely important. Leningrad was a vital industrial and cultural hub, and the border sat just 32 kilometers away.
That's what, like a 20-mile drive? That is nothing.
It's artillery range.
Yeah.
So Stalin basically demanded that Finland cede several territories to create a defensive buffer zone.
Just hand over their land.
Right. This included moving the border back on the Karelian Isthmus, which, for those visualizing the map, is the narrow land bridge between the Gulf of Finland and Lake Ladoga.
Right.
And he also wanted them to hand over specific islands in the Gulf of Finland.
But if you are the Finnish government in Helsinki, agreeing to those demands isn't just some minor border adjustment.
Not at all.
They had just secured their sovereignty a couple of decades prior, right? Like after the Russian Revolution and their own really bitter civil war.
Yeah, it was fresh in their cultural memory. Independence was hard won.
And furthermore, the Karelian Isthmus was exactly where the Finns had built their primary defensive network, the Mannerheim Line.
Right. Their entire defensive strategy relied on that terrain.
Exactly. We're talking concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles. Giving up that territory meant giving up their only hardened defensive barrier against a Soviet invasion.
It was an impossible demand. It was viewed in Helsinki as the precursor to total annexation. So, unsurprisingly, Finland refused.
Good for them, honestly. But Stalin didn't take that well.
No, not at all. In response, the Soviet Union just denounced the legitimate Finnish government.
Right.
They recognized this puppet regime they essentially created in the border town of Terijoki, led by a Finnish communist named Otto Kuusinen.
Wow, so they just fabricated a whole new government to give themselves an excuse.
Exactly. Yeah. It granted them the political pretext to go in and, quote-unquote, liberate the country. And following that, they launched a massive invasion.
And when we say massive, we're talking about over 450,000 Soviet troops pouring across a 1,200-kilometer frontier.
The scale of that front line is just hard to wrap your head around. It's massive.
Right, but most of the Soviet strategic weight was concentrated in the south, right? Like aimed at smashing through that Mannerheim Line on the Karelian Isthmus to drive straight toward Helsinki.
Yes, that was the primary thrust. But there was a secondary, really critical objective further north.
Okay.
The Soviet Ninth Army was tasked with pushing westward through the dense forests of central Finland. Their goal was the port city of Oulu on the Gulf of Bothnia.
So wait, what is the operational logic there? Why drive through the middle of nowhere?
The idea was to slice Finland in half at its narrowest point.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, by taking Oulu, the Soviets would sever the northern half of the country from the southern half. But more importantly, it would cut the vital railway and road links connecting Finland to Sweden.
Which would essentially strangle any external supply lines.
Precisely. No supplies from Sweden means the Finnish resistance starves.
Okay, but I am really struggling to understand the operational planning here. I mean, if your goal is to decapitate the country, why expend massive resources trying to drive a mechanized army through the middle of a primeval forest in the dead of winter?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
It's like trying to drive a luxury sports car through a dense, unpaved swamp. Like, it doesn't matter how much horsepower you have if the environment completely nullifies your machine. Why not just concentrate everything on the capital?
Well, you are looking at it through the lens of hindsight, and you're assuming the Soviets anticipated a difficult fight in those forests.
It didn't.
No. The Soviet High Command planned a rapid advance based purely on their paper superiority. They assumed the Finnish resistance would crumble in days.
Wow, just total arrogance.
Completely. They literally looked at the map, saw a line from their border to Oulu, and just ordered the Ninth Army to take it.
Insane.
And the route to Oulu ran through this small village called Suomussalmi, which was connected to the Soviet border by a single, narrow dirt logging track called the Raate Road.
Wait, a single-lane dirt track?
Yes. They committed heavy mechanized divisions to a single-lane logging road because they genuinely didn't believe the terrain or the Finns would offer any meaningful resistance.
Okay, let's examine the specific forces ordered down that logging track, because this is where the mismatch gets really glaring.
Yeah, the numbers are striking.
Advancing towards Suomussalmi was the Soviet 45th Rifle Corps. This consisted primarily of the 163rd Rifle Division and the 44th Ukrainian Rifle Division.
Right.
So we are talking about a total force of about 45,000 troops, 150 light and medium tanks, and over 335 artillery pieces.
It's a massive, heavy footprint. And Generals Andrei Zelentsov and Alexei Vinogradov commanded these divisions.
And what was their leadership style?
Well, they were operating under a very rigid, centralized Soviet military doctrine. This doctrine relied heavily on overwhelming mass and combined arms.
Meaning infantry, armor, and artillery all maneuvering together.
Exactly, maneuvering in concert to overwhelm an objective. But the flaw was that it required strict, centralized control.
Right.
Tactical decisions had to be routed all the way up to Corps Command and then back down. There was absolutely no latitude for a company commander on the ground to just, deviate from the established plan if things change.
Wait, but if they have 150 tanks and over 300 artillery pieces, they are physically shackled to the road infrastructure anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, a column of that size requires an uninterrupted flow of fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and supply wagons.
That is the core vulnerability. Heavy mechanized forces require massive logistical lifelines. In a trackless old-growth forest with deep snow, an armored division cannot deploy into a wide battle line.
Because they just get stuck in the trees and snow.
Exactly. They must travel in a single-file column along the only available road. The road dictates entirely where they can go and how fast they can move.
Which makes them incredibly predictable. And on the other side of this, waiting in the forest, is the Finnish 9th Infantry Division, commanded by Colonel Hjalmar Siilasvuo.
A fascinating guy.
Yeah, he is a recalled reservist, and his force is a composite of about 11,000 men. We are talking about the 27th, 64th, and 65th Infantry Regiments, heavily augmented by local militiamen from the surrounding Kainuu region.
Right, and it's so important to understand who these men were. These were not professional soldiers accustomed to large-scale combined arms maneuvers.
No.
They were loggers, hunters, and farmers. They possessed very few anti-tank weapons, almost no modern motor transport, and a really minimal artillery park.
Okay, I have to challenge the idea that lacking heavy equipment somehow made them superior, though.
Fair enough. It sounds like a disadvantage.
Right. I mean, if a column of Soviet T-26 tanks is rolling down the road toward your village and you don't have anti-tank guns, how do you even stop them? You can't just hunt a tank with a standard hunting rifle.
Well, you don't hunt it with a rifle. You hunt it by blinding it and depriving it of its infantry support.
Blinding it?
Yes. Siilasvuo realized his lack of motor transport actually forced him to rely on what his men already excelled at: cross-country skiing, and wilderness navigation.
I see.
Without heavy supply convoys tying them down, the Finnish troops possessed total mobility through the forest. They could move anywhere.
Right. They aren't road-bound like the Soviets.
Exactly. And when it came to the tanks, the environment heavily restricted the armor. A tank buttoned up for combat in a dense forest has terrible visibility.
They're basically looking through tiny slits.
Right. So the Finns used the thick tree cover to get incredibly close. They would focus fire to separate the tank from its supporting infantry. Then they just ski right up to the blind spots of the armor and disable the tracks with a satchel charge or like a localized explosive. They couldn't fight a tank battalion in an open field, obviously, but in a dense forest, they turned the tanks into isolated pillboxes.
That is brilliant. So this massive clash of doctrines, a road-bound mechanized corps versus highly mobile, decentralized ski troops, it all collides at Suomussalmi in late November 1939.
That's right.
So the Soviet 163rd Rifle Division, which is roughly 17,000 men, crosses the border and pushes toward the village.
And the Finns are heavily outnumbered in the immediate area.
Right, and they understand they cannot hold a fixed line against that much artillery and armor. So by December 7th, as the Soviet vanguard reaches Suomussalmi, the Finns actually evacuate the village.
But they don't just leave.
No, they burn it to the ground before they go. Scorched earth.
And that decision to implement scorched earth tactics created an immediate logistical and physical crisis for the advancing Soviets.
How so?
Well, General Zelentsov's 163rd Division occupied Suomussalmi, achieving their operational map objective. Yay for them, right?
Right, they took the dot on the map.
But the ground reality was that they had just marched into a burnt-out crater. There were absolutely no intact buildings left for shelter.
Oh, man.
The local population had fled, meaning there were no forced laborers to clear roads and no local intelligence to interrogate. And most critically, the temperature began dropping to negative 30 degrees Celsius.
Okay, we really need to explore the mechanics of subarctic survival at negative 30 degrees Celsius because it fundamentally degrades a mechanized army in ways you wouldn't expect.
It's terrifying, honestly.
Yeah, like at that temperature, standard gun oil literally freezes solid. It jams the action on rifles and machine guns.
Yep, the weapons just seize up.
If troops aren't trained to strip their weapons and wipe them completely dry or, mix the oil with gasoline, their weapons simply stop working.
And bare skin freezes to metal. Engine blocks on trucks and tanks will crack unless they are left idling 24 hours a day.
Which drains fuel reserves at an astronomical rate.
Exactly. And then there is also the physiological aspect. A human body in negative 30 degrees requires thousands of additional calories a day just to maintain a core temperature through shivering.
Just to not die.
Right. So if the supply trucks carrying food are delayed even a little bit, the combat effectiveness of a soldier drops precipitously within hours.
So the Soviet troops are essentially occupying the ashes of Suomussalmi, exposed to the freezing wind coming off the lakes and rapidly burning through their fuel and rations just to stay alive.
They were in a desperate survival situation almost immediately.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This is exactly when Colonel Siilasvuo begins his counteroffensive.
Right, the trap closes.
He looks at this massive Soviet division stalled out in the cold, entirely dependent on those supply lines stretching back east, and he initiates a tactical approach that would define the entire conflict. Motti tactics. Yeah, motti is actually a Finnish forestry term. It refers to a massive felled tree that is just way too heavy to move in one piece.
Right, you can't just drag a whole pine tree out of the woods.
Exactly. So instead of trying to drag the whole tree, a logger chops it into smaller, manageable blocks of firewood, which are called mottis, and then you can deal with those individually.
It's such a perfect analogy for what Siilasvuo did. He applied this exact forestry principle to the Soviet column.
Right, because he couldn't attack 17,000 entrenched men head-on.
No, that would be suicide. So he ordered his highly mobile ski troops to just bypass the main Soviet concentrations. They cut these invisible trails through the deep snow, navigating miles around the Soviet flanks.
Just slipping past them in the trees.
Exactly. And then they struck the single supply road leading back to the border in multiple locations simultaneously.
So they are essentially slicing the tree.
Yes.
Like a platoon fells massive pine trees across the road at one point, sets up a machine gun nest, and suddenly the road is blocked.
And then 2 miles down the road, another Finnish detachment blows a huge crater in the dirt track and mines the perimeter.
So suddenly, this continuous massive Soviet division is severed into multiple isolated pockets.
They are chopped into mottis.
It creates total paralysis. I mean, once the road was cut, the Soviet command structure fractured.
Because of that rigid doctrine we mentioned.
Right. Their centralized doctrine required them to await orders, but their communications were severed.
They were just sitting there waiting for a radio call that was never going to come. And furthermore, the Soviet armor couldn't maneuver off the road to flank the roadblocks.
Because of the snow.
Right, the snow was over a meter deep, hiding massive boulders and ravines. The tanks were effectively trapped in a linear siege.
The psychological impact of this on the Soviet conscripts must have been absolutely devastating.
Unimaginable.
I mean, daylight in northern Finland during December lasts only a few hours. For most of the day, these isolated Soviet pockets are sitting in total darkness.
In negative 30-degree cold.
Yes. And they are starving because the supply convoys are burning on the road miles away. The source actually mentions that Soviet soldiers were forced to butcher their draft horses for meat.
And when the horse meat ran out, they boiled their leather belts, trying to extract something, anything edible.
It's horrific.
And they were forced to light campfires just to keep from freezing to death. But lighting a fire in a dark forest instantly silhouettes you.
You become a glowing target.
Exactly. The Finnish ski troops, clothed in white winter camouflage, would silently glide into range. They would fire a few bursts from a Suomi submachine gun into the group, huddle around the fire, throw a grenade, and literally vanish back into the trees before the stunned survivors could even orient themselves to return fire.
That is terrifying.
The Finns controlled the engagement envelope completely. The Soviets were just helpless targets.
So by late December, the 163rd Division is completely exhausted. Siilasvuo orders the final assault to liquidate the Mottis.
The finishing blows.
Yeah. The Finns systematically attack these isolated pockets, and the Soviets have expended practically all their ammunition firing blindly into the dark woods for weeks at ghosts.
Right. They've been shooting at every snapping twig.
So when the Finns finally overrun their positions, the Soviet infantry is reduced to launching desperate bayonet charges in waist-deep snow.
Which is just a tactical slaughter. I mean, a soldier trying to run through deep snow with a bayonet is moving at an absolute crawl.
Completely exposed.
Yes, completely exposed to Finnish automatic weapons fire.
Mm.
So by December 29th, organized resistance at Suomussalmi just totally collapsed. The 163rd Rifle Division was utterly annihilated.
And the few survivors.
They broke formation and attempted to flee eastward through the trackless wilderness toward the border, but the vast majority of them just succumbed to the extreme cold.
Man. So you have an entire modern mechanized division erased from the order of battle by a localized reserve force.
It's unprecedented.
Right. And given that catastrophic failure, you would naturally expect the Soviet high command to halt, reassess the environment, maybe change tactics.
You would think so.
Instead, they order the 44th Rifle Division to march straight down the exact same Raate Road to relieve the troops at Suomussalmi.
It's baffling. But you have to remember, the Soviet High Command was actually unaware of the total destruction of the 163rd when they issued that order.
Wow, communications were really that bad.
Yeah. General Vinogradov's 44th Division was considered an elite formation. They had over 17,000 troops, heavily supported by tanks, a massive artillery component, and extensive truck convoys.
So they just crossed the border and pushed onto the Raate Road, attempting to force their way west.
Exactly. And again, we're looking at 17,000 men, trucks, and tanks confined to a single logging track.
So this division stretches out into a continuous bumper-to-bumper column nearly 20 kilometers long.
Just inching forward.
Barely moving. Now, Colonel Siilasvuo recognized the vulnerability of this 20-kilometer column, obviously, but his main forces were still heavily engaged, finishing off the 163rd Division at Suomussalmi.
Right. He couldn't just redeploy his entire division yet.
So what does he do? He utilizes an economy of force strategy. He deployed small, highly aggressive ski detachments to harass the head of the 44th Division.
Just enough to slow them down.
Exactly. They focused on a choke point at a place called Haukila, about 10 kilometers east of Suomussalmi. They felled trees, laid mines, and engaged the lead Soviet elements just enough to force General Vinogradov to halt the entire column and deploy into a defensive posture.
Which is exactly what Siilasvuo wanted. The 44th Division is now stalled, trying to defend a 20-kilometer line of trucks and armor just sitting idle on a dirt road.
And guarding a 20-kilometer perimeter in a dense forest is an absolute manpower nightmare.
Oh, it's impossible. The Soviets had to place sentry outposts every few hundred meters along the tree line just to monitor their own flanks.
So once Siilasvuo completed the destruction of the 163rd Division, he immediately shifts his main regiments eastward to deal with the stalled 44th.
And this is where the Finns executed what might be one of the most masterful pieces of logistical engineering in the entire war.
Yeah, this part blew my mind. So the Soviets are trapped on the mud and snow of the Raate Road, but running parallel to this road, just to the south, is a chain of frozen lakes, specifically Alantijärvi and Vuokijärvi.
Right.
The Finns look at these frozen lakes and realize they don't need to fight their way through the dense forest to move their troops. They construct an improvised ice road right over the lakes.
It is such a critical tactical innovation. And it wasn't just driving on the snow. To build an ice road capable of actually supporting horse-drawn artillery and heavy supply sleds, you cannot just drive on a snow-covered lake.
Why not? Is it too slippery?
No, it's about the thickness of the ice. Snow acts as an insulator. It actually keeps the ice below it relatively warm and thin.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah, so the Finns systematically plowed the snow completely off the surface of the lakes along their planned route. Exposing the bare ice directly to the negative 30-degree air caused it to freeze exceptionally deep and hard, creating a surface strong enough to bear significant weight.
That is just incredible. But I am amazed that the Soviets didn't detect this massive logistical highway being built right parallel to their stalled division. Like, why didn't Soviet air power just bomb the ice road?
Well, aerial reconnaissance in subarctic winter conditions in 1939 was highly ineffective.
It's just too much weather.
Yeah, the cloud ceilings were extremely low, visibility was constantly obscured by snow squalls, and the daylight window, as we mentioned, was only a few hours long.
Makes sense.
And even if a Soviet pilot managed to get above the lakes, distinguishing a cleared strip of ice from the surrounding white landscape from several thousand feet up is incredibly difficult.
It all just looks white.
Exactly. So the Finns operated largely undetected, effectively building a frictionless highway that allowed them to redeploy battalions and artillery anywhere along the 20-kilometer Soviet flank in a matter of hours.
Which completely flips the mobility dynamic.
Completely.
This ice road enables the next phase of the motti tactics. In early January, the Finns launch coordinated simultaneous strikes along the entire length of the Raate Road.
Just carving them up.
Yeah. On January 6th, Finnish engineers managed to infiltrate and blow up the Porosjoki River Bridge right in the middle of the Soviet column.
And severing that bridge physically cut the 44th Division in half.
Yeah.
The heavy vehicles could not cross the river ravine. The division was now trapped in multiple, massive mottis.
And then the Finns hauled light artillery pieces across their ice road, manhandled them up the forested ridges overlooking the Raate Road, and just began firing directly down into the stalled convoys.
It was absolute chaos for the Soviets. Their defense collapsed into localized hedgehogs. They pulled their tanks and trucks into tight circles, attempting to create steel perimeters.
Like wagons circling in a western.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
But there is this chilling account from a captured Russian colonel interviewed after the battle.
Yeah, I read this.
He stated that during the entire multi-day engagement, he never actually saw a single Finnish soldier.
That's haunting.
But his men were acutely aware that if a sentry or a patrol took even 10 steps off the road into the forest, they would vanish and never be seen again.
The forest itself had become a fatal boundary.
Right. It perfectly illustrates the concept of microterrain dominating the battlefield.
Okay. Can you break down what microterrain actually means in this context?
Sure. Microterrain refers to the small, localized features of the environment that do not show up on a standard topographical map.
Like what?
Like a slight depression in the ground, a thick stand of fir trees, or a snow-covered ravine. A general map might just show a flat green patch indicating a forest, but the microterrain dictates the actual sightlines, avenues of approach, and available cover.
It's like a home field advantage where you know exactly which floorboards in your house creak in the dark.
That's a great way to put it.
It allows you to move silently while an intruder just stumbles blindly around making a ton of noise.
Yes. The Finns understood the microterrain intimately. They knew exactly which ravines allowed them to approach the road unseen and which ridges offered the best firing angles for their artillery.
So it's akin to a naval engagement where a massive fleet of heavy battleships is forced to navigate a narrow, uncharted canal.
Right.
The battleships have overwhelming firepower, sure, but they can't maneuver or even turn their main guns. Meanwhile, the local defenders in small, fast attack craft know every shallow reef and hidden inlet.
Yep, they dictate the terms of the fight.
They can dart out, launch torpedoes, and retreat back into the shallows where the battleships literally cannot follow. The heavy armor of the battleships is totally irrelevant if they are structurally incapable of bringing their weapons to bear on the threat.
Exactly. And the Soviets were entirely blind to the microterrain. They were reacting to attacks they couldn't see from directions they couldn't predict.
It's just a nightmare scenario.
And it got worse. Between January 6th and January 8th, the temperature plummeted again.
Yeah.
Without fuel to keep the engines running or fires to stay warm, the wounded simply froze to death in the medical tents.
Awful.
Any organized attempt to break out and retreat devolved into panicked, uncoordinated movement through the deep snow, and they were easily cut down by Finnish machine gun positions established at those key choke points.
So by January 10th, the 44th Rifle Division effectively ceased to exist. Out of the roughly 17,500 men who entered the Raate Road, only a fraction managed to escape through the woods back to the border.
It's a total wipeout.
The battlefield was basically a 20-kilometer graveyard of frozen bodies, thousands of dead draft horses, and hundreds of abandoned vehicles.
And the material haul for the Finns was staggering. I mean, they captured dozens of intact tanks, hundreds of trucks, and enough artillery pieces, small arms, and ammunition to re-equip entire Finnish battalions.
Which is crazy to think about. Through sheer tactical incompetence and environmental ignorance, the Soviet Union inadvertently became a major supplier of arms to the Finnish military.
They literally armed their own enemy.
So how does the wider military community analyze this specific engagement today? I know military academies still study the Winter War. Does the concept of the motti even apply in modern warfare, given all the technological advancements in armor and aerial reconnaissance we have now?
Oh, absolutely. Modern military academies such as Sandhurst and West Point, they heavily study the battles of Suomussalmi and Raate Road because the core vulnerabilities exposed there remain completely relevant today.
Really? Even with drones and satellites?
Yes, modern mechanized forces are still fundamentally reliant on logistical tails. They need fuel, they need ammo. While a modern armored column might have thermal imaging and constant drone support, if they're forced into a narrow valley or a single constrained supply route, they're still highly susceptible to isolation.
They still have to drive on the road.
Exactly.
Mm.
Today, drones and precision artillery have simply replaced the Finnish ski troops as the mechanism for severing the supply lines and creating the motti.
That makes total sense.
The principle of fixing a road-bound force in place and starving it of logistics remains a foundational military doctrine.
Okay, let's look at the broader legacy of this specific sector's battle. The casualty disparity is just difficult to comprehend. The Soviet Union suffered approximately 23,000 men dead or missing, lost 85 tanks and over 90 artillery pieces.
And the Finnish 9th Division.
They suffered roughly 800 dead.
It is a devastating ratio. Now, we must clarify that these incredible tactical victories did not win the overall Winter War for Finland.
Right, because of the sheer numbers eventually.
Yes. By March 1940, the sheer attritional weight of the Soviet Union forced the Finns to sue for peace and concede the territories originally demanded.
They just ran out of men and bullets.
Exactly. However, the destruction of the 45th Rifle Corps had profound strategic ripple effects globally.
Well, it exposed severe institutional rot within the Red Army command structure, for one.
Yes, it did. The Soviet High Command was humiliated by the performance of their forces. It initiated a brutal, rapid period of reassessment and reform.
They realized they had to change.
They realized their rigid doctrine was a massive failure, their winter logistics were essentially non-existent, and their combined arms coordination was fundamentally broken. So they began actively reforming these deficiencies.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most dangerous consequence of the Winter War didn't happen in Moscow or Helsinki. It occurred in Berlin.
Yes, German intelligence is monitoring this conflict closely. Hitler and the German High Command are watching a nation of fewer than 4 million people systematically dismantle entire Soviet Army Corps.
Right, and the German observers looked at the frozen wreckage on the Raate Road and drew a completely catastrophic conclusion.
They determined that the Red Army was tactically incompetent, poorly led, and structurally fragile.
They assumed that if a lightly armed militia could inflict such disproportionate casualties, then their highly mechanized German Wehrmacht would easily shatter the Soviet state.
Which heavily influenced Hitler's strategic calculus. It led directly to the decision to launch Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, just 15 months later.
It was a fatal intelligence failure on Germany's part,
Massive.
because they assumed the Soviet military they would face in 1941 was the exact same rigid, unprepared force that died in the Finnish forests in 1939.
They failed to account for the fact that the Soviets were actively learning from the Winter War and adapting their doctrines.
Right, so the German military marched eastward, underestimating the environment and the enemy, and ultimately met their own destruction in the Russian winter.
It really underscores the danger of confirming your own biases based on a localized, environmentally specific battle. The Germans saw Soviet weakness, but failed to recognize the unique microterrain and climatic factors that enabled the Finnish victory.
The threads of these decisions are just deeply intertwined.
They really are. History is never isolated.
Returning to that specific terrain, though, the source material by Michael Prichter really brings the history into the present. He walked the Raate Road in January 2018.
And nearly 80 years later, the landscape remains largely unchanged.
Yeah, he experienced the same negative 30-degree cold, the meter-deep snow right off the dirt tracks. The forest is still silent and dense.
The battlefield itself retains the physical scars. There are still destroyed Red Army tanks and rusted vehicle chassis sitting half buried in the snow along the road.
It hasn't been heavily developed or sanitized at all.
It's very raw.
There is a dedicated Raate Road museum that preserves the artifacts, but the monuments built directly into the landscape are what truly convey the gravity of the event.
There were separate memorials for the Ukrainian soldiers and the Russian soldiers, but the most striking is the Winter War Monument.
It is a profound piece of memorial architecture. It forces the visitor to confront the scale of the loss without glorifying the combat.
It's essentially a field containing exactly 17,000 rough, unhewn boulders set into the snow among the trees.
And each individual boulder represents a single Soviet soldier who died on that specific stretch of road.
It's incredibly moving.
I want you to visualize standing in the absolute freezing silence of that subarctic forest. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe. And surrounding you, disappearing into the tree line, are 17,000 stones.
It strips away all the maps, the doctrines, and the geopolitical posturing.
It just leaves the staggering human cost of a military machine failing to respect the environment it tried to conquer.
It is a sobering reminder that nature is an entirely neutral arbiter. It does not care about your rank, your armor, or your strategic objectives.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. We operate in a world obsessed with scale and technological superiority. We build incredibly complex, data-driven systems, assuming that sheer mass and advanced engineering will guarantee success.
Right. Bigger is always better.
But when those systems are deployed into unpredictable, unforgiving environments, when the ground truth refuses to align with the theoretical model, does our heavy machinery actually make us powerful?
Or does it merely make us rigidly bound to a single path, utterly vulnerable to those who understand the microterrain we have forgotten how to navigate?
Flexibility and an intimate understanding of the environment will always outmaneuver a blind reliance on mass. For a detailed breakdown of the unit movements, the environmental data, and incredible imagery of the monuments we discussed, I highly recommend reading the full analysis at battlefieldtravels.com. Keep questioning the map and keep your eyes on the ground.